There was something in the air,
Yeah.
something, it was some sort of divine intervention that came through in the end.
What's good? I'm Nikesha Elise Williams, and this is Black and Published on the Mahogany Books Podcast Network, bringing you the journeys of writers, poets, playwrights, and storytellers of all kinds. Okay, family, we are 1 week out from the publication of my forthcoming novel, The Seven Daughters of Dupree. And so today's guest is the person who is responsible for helping me bring it into the world. My editor, the one and only Alison Callahan. A lover of words from the youngest of ages, Alison is adamant that her role as an editor is to make a book better without anyone ever knowing she was there.
I was so in love with your words that I didn't really want anything to go. Sometimes with edits, you're like, this doesn't need to be here whatsoever, like let's let it go. And it's okay to sacrifice it. But with you, I didn't want anything to go. It was a harder process because I was so emotionally involved with all of the women in your book.
Alison got her start in the business as a journalism major turned assistant to a literary agent and has been working in book publishing for more than 20 years. Even after all her acquisitions and editorial success, why our editor-author relationship was always destined to be. Plus, the deep dive Alison and her team did into me before making the deal. And why she feels intimidated every time she takes off her editorial hat and tries to approach the page as a potential author. That and more is next when Black and Published continues. Alison, why did you want to become an editor?
It's sort of a story that you hear from a lot of editors, I believe, but that only hastens for me to make it ever more true in that when I was young, I read books all the time. I played sports, and I had a lot of friends, so I wasn't just hiding in the corner reading, but I actually took a lot of pleasure from reading. And so as I was growing up and you get to high school and people start asking you questions, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I knew I wanted to work with writing, but I didn't know really about the ins and outs of book publishing, when I was 14, 15 years old. And so I said, I want to be a journalist. That was sort of my way in. And so I applied to one college, early admission, which was like the best school in the country for journalism, and I happened to get in. So I didn't have to apply to any other schools. And when I went to that school, I majored in magazine. And it was a major at the time. And I spent, 4 years doing research and writing and paring down and editing. And I got a job out of college at the Atlantic Monthly. It was a glorified internship, let's put it that way. And that was at the time, it was in Boston. And about a year into that process, the fiction editor who I was doing a lot of work for suggested I apply to the Radcliffe Publishing Program, which was at Harvard at the time. It's now at Columbia. And I got in. And so when I was there, the publishing program at Radcliffe was equally half and half journalism and books. And I marched in journalism and I marched out wanting to be in book publishing. And so I received a job offer before the program was even over for a literary agency in New York. And so I moved to New York and started there.
Okay, I think you told me some of this.
I worked as an assistant to a literary agent for a year and 2 months. And I remember it quite clearly because the agent I worked for was notoriously challenging. And I held the record in that spot for a long time. Most people lasted about 5 months up until then. And I worked for her for a year and 2 months, and then I got a job offer at a publishing house, and it went from there.
And so you've been publishing books ever since. What is the best part of the editorial process for you?
For me, always and forever, it's working with the authors. There is nothing that compares to it in terms of job satisfaction. Working with authors on their work, and for the most part, I work with debut novelists, until they establish themselves and then we stay with each other, hopefully, for the career. But in the beginning, it's something that the author has been working intensely on by themselves most of the time for years. And so they're, sensitive and a little scared, in the beginning when someone starts to put their hands on it, as I'm sure you know. But It is a delicate and very trusting relationship, and I don't ever disrespect or undervalue that. And as I've always said, if I've done a good job, no one will ever know I was there.
Wow. Like that, like from our own process, that makes sense. Wow. Yeah. How do you do that when surely I know you have a point of view, but like how do you like thread that balance to make sure that you're pulling the best out of the author and that it's still wholly their work?
It's entirely a conversation. And I say that to every author I work with right from the beginning. These are my edits. This is what I suggest to you. And we work from there. There are some things that authors will agree with. There are some things that authors will disagree with. And when there's a disagreement, that's when the conversation becomes ever more important so that the editor and me representing our publisher feels satisfied with the work that we are going to put out in the world, but that the author also feels that they still have entire ownership over their words. They feel heard. And a lot of the time, it comes to a compromise so that both parties can feel incredibly proud of the work that's going to be introduced to readers and booksellers alike. So it's a conversation always. At the end of the day, the work is the author's. It's not mine. I didn't write it. It's my job to come in and take what you, the author, or the other authors that I've worked with, has written and just make it as strong as it can possibly be.
Have you ever had the desire to write your own novel or book or of anything?
I have, and I have never done it. I have to say, I have nothing but the utmost awe and respect for the authors that managed to do this because every time I've sat down and cracked my knuckles, I end up running away screaming or cleaning the countertops for the 10th time because I'm intimidated by the process. That's why I think I have so much respect for the people I work with.
Okay. So Peter told the story when I talked to him that he remembers sitting on his couch and he had his phone in his hand and getting like a text or something from you, maybe it was an email, and was like, "Can I take you to lunch?" And he says it was like a Sunday night or whatever.
Okay.
And I spoke to him like the Monday after because it was the week that I was going to have editorial calls. It's like, I just got a message from Alison Callahan. She wants to take me to lunch. I think she just finished the book when she messaged me. So can you tell the story of like, how did you come into knowledge of the Seven Daughters of Dupree and what happened?
Oh, it is a story that I will tell forever and happily. So, Peter and I have known each other because a lot of us in publishing, we're all peers. We've been in it for the same amount of time. And so, Peter has been submitting novels to me for 15 years, and we're friends, And so, as editors, we get a lot of books in on submission. And there are certain agents. We respect all agents, of course. I don't want this to sound at all like a hierarchical, and it's not, but it's people that you have relationships with, that you've become good friends with, and you really trust their taste and they know what you're looking for. That over all of those years, it becomes so refined that they know Alison Callahan likes this kind of book. This is what, gets her engines revving. And so when he pitched it to me and submitted it to me, I think it was on a Friday, I said, this is going to take priority. And your book was long, girl, when it first came
I
in.
know it was that long.
It was over 500 pages. And, I had kids at home and it was a weekend. And I read the entire thing in a day and a half, 2 days. And I felt so I've been wanting to say this to you for a while. When you and I spoke after the fact, you said there was like a spirit in you for certain parts of the book where it was just coming out. It was as if somebody or something, some entity was moving you to write this book. And I think some of that spirit kind of leaked into me because when I read it that quickly over the weekend, shuffling kids around and doing what I had to do, I had felt this compelling urge to text him immediately. And a lot of the time over the weekend, we don't text each other because we try to maintain boundaries of some semblance of a life outside of publishing, even though it's hard. We're working all the time. And I felt compelled to text him. And I did. And then in the morning, I woke up and I went to work and I was so antsy and frantic that your book was going to be snatched up by someone quickly because it was so unbelievably good that I called him on Monday morning and said, "We're having lunch in 2 hours." He was like, "Okay, okay." And I had never done that before. Hand to God, I had never done that in my 20 plus year career. And we went to lunch and I just sort of looked at him over our salads saying, "What can I do?" And then we did it.
Yeah.
I just was so compelled. I had to meet the person who wrote this unbelievable novel, which was you.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember because we had gone out on submission. It started like the week prior. That was like the first week of May on a Tuesday. And then we had like one call set up for the next week. And then I don't know what he did between then and Monday, but by the end of Monday, your call got added for like the Wednesday. And then there were like 9 more set up. And then we spoke on Wednesday at like 10 or 11. And then by 2, he called back and was like, Alison made a preemptive offer. And I was like, what does that even mean? Does it normally move that fast? Like, what kind of autonomy do you have?
Well, the funny thing is that these days, as with everything media related, it never used to move that fast. Everything moves at the speed of light now, which was part of the reason why I was so antsy on Monday morning, because I knew that if I felt this way, everyone in New York was going to feel this way. That's how unbelievable your book was. And so my publisher, you can't just run to your publisher and say, "I want to buy this today. Thank you very much." There is a lot that goes in behind it. But my publisher also knows me very well. And I went to her shaking. I had the look of, fear in my eyes. And she said, "Whoa, sit down." So she saw how important it was to me, how excited I was, but also how meaningful I thought this book would be and how important I felt it was to have this book on our list. And when they see that kind of enthusiasm in their editors, this sort of unbridled, almost like primal, where we're not going to get up out of the chair and leave the office and let her think about it, which of course she's going to do anyway. But she looked at me and said, "Okay, let's start moving. You haven't been like this in a long time." And we went to the bank, which is the business office, 4 floors up, and we got the money. But she saw in me the fervor. And, we're excited about every book we buy. Don't misunderstand me. I love all of my authors and I love all of them as equally. But there are certain projects that are extra special, and this was one of them.
Thank you. But like, even as you said that and like following you online, I love when I see you talk about books and you're posting and you're going everywhere. Because I was like, the same enthusiasm Allison has for wherever she's at and whatever she's doing with whatever author. Let's bring it on home. So, like, I love to see your enthusiasm for all of your authors who are on your list. I love it. I was shocked because, like, I've told you before, like, my life was a shambles. I had just gotten divorced. All I was trying to do was get an agent. I had no idea that the submission process would go so quickly. And I remember when everything was all finalized. And so it was between you and another Simon editorial team. And Peter called me and was like, "So you've got everything that we asked for. Nothing's going to change. You just have to choose your editor." And he was like screaming and really excited. I think he had just gotten off the train. And my son was in the middle of a meltdown over his fractions. So I was trying to stay really calm. I was like, thank you so very much. I'm so excited. I'll talk to you tomorrow. But my son is doing fractions and he's crying and I'm trying to stay calm. I'll talk to you later. Have a good one. And so it was very much like that. And then, the Thursday I met with the other team. And then
Yep.
afterwards, Peter was like, "Okay, so who do you want to work with?" I was like, "What kind of question is that?" And I remember taking notes during both meetings and then saying that I would let him know by that Friday at noon. What was that like for you? Because I know what it was like for me. I was stressed.
It was, it is unbearable for an editor to not, especially after you and I had spoken and I had your email address, which was so tempting. I can't tell you the temptation. Again, back to what I was saying earlier, I was maybe cleaning my kitchen every 5 minutes, looking at my phone every 2 seconds. It's like, my daughter waiting to hear from colleges, refresh, refresh, refresh. And that's what I was doing the whole time. I couldn't focus on anything else. The waiting game, sitting in the waiting room is incredibly difficult. And I should also say that I knew my competition in-house, the other editor, who was an extremely formidable candidate who I have such respect for, that I didn't feel 100% confident that I was going to be the lucky one to work with you. And so that made it even harder, to be honest with you.
You talk about the urge to email me, but you all did. You sent me a deck, and then you had
I
the publisher
know.
write me a letter. I had never seen anything like this. I didn't know what to expect, but I was like, this isn't normal. Like, the
No.
publisher doesn't write a letter saying, this is why we really want you to sign with us. And then the team doesn't make a pitch deck with your own pictures from my Instagram page of, this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to position you. And we're going to take you from where you already are. And like, we're just going to go up. I was like, this is ew.
What can I say? Your book is so special. And also, I keep talking about your book, which is unbelievable. And I've had the pleasure, as you know, to pitch it to booksellers and librarians a couple of times now because it is so exciting and passionate for me to do so. But also, what's equally as important is how impressive you are. Once we read the book and we wanted to buy it, and I had multiple editors in the building had read it, and we were all saying we must work on this incredibly special piece of fiction. Once they met you, they thought, oh my God, who is this person? You are so impressive. You are so talented in your day job, so to speak. We had gone back and read everything. Unfortunately, it might feel creepy, but it's just us doing our homework. We went back, we listened to every podcast, that you had done on Black and Published. We tried to get copies of your nonfiction book that you had written before. We did everything we could to get to know you. And the more that we got to know you, the more excited we became. Not every author is the same, obviously. Everyone is their own person, and some people are more shy, and that's fine. That's the life of a writer. But sometimes it makes it harder when an author is, say, not exactly willing to post online, or, is soft spoken and doesn't quite have a handle on how they want to pitch their book or talk about their book. And that's okay too. Writing is so solitary. And a lot of writers' natures to be a showman, so to speak. Not that you're a showman, but you
It's a
had
show.
it's a show, it's
It's
a
a show.
show, and you knew how to produce television. You were so comfortable interviewing authors and speaking about fiction and the underlying themes. And so it was your book that was incredible, that started it all, of course. But once we all got to know you, it became 10 times more important because you are such an extraordinary person, writer, professional, and that it enhanced everything by 100%.
Thank you. I didn't know that backstory. So then once you got the email at exactly noon, because I
Yeah,
remember I had a meeting,
exactly,
I
dude.
had a
Right
meeting
down to
for
the
work.
minute you made me sweat it out.
What was your experience?
Screaming, screaming. My heart rate finally started to normalize because I was in like a probably low grade heart attack for about 24 hours, just like sort of getting there, a low hum. Screaming with excitement, screaming with joy, a lot of pride to know that this was going to be on our list and that it was only going to enhance our list in a way that is extraordinary. We were just so proud to have shown you what we wanted to do and what our intention was for your book, for you as an author, and for your career going forward. That was so important to us. And so I went running into the publicity director's office, I went running into the publisher's office, and we're all jumping up and down. And then I had to look at my 400 emails that had piled up because I was dithering around my house, not working at all, and tried to jump back into the slipstream of regular work life. But I was in the glow. We were all in the glow for days. And I couldn't have been more honored to have been chosen by you. That was really the feeling, like honor.
So that's the acquisition process. And then the real work
Yes.
began.
And then the real work began.
Going from
Absolutely.
500 pages to what's it,
Yes,
336 now?
it is. I have it right in front of me. 320 when it's typeset.
Ooh.
It went on a nice little diet. Like I always said, I'm like, we gave it just like maybe the micro dose of Ozempic, not the full force.
So, like, after the acquisition process is over and you are looking at it with your editorial eyes, do you automatically know what it is that you want to do or what needs to be done to make it lean and mean and the best that it can be?
So that's a yes and no. When I was reading it, for the most part, when I'm reading a book on submission, I'm not quite reading it with a deep editorial eye. I'm reading it for its own entertainment value, for its own, is this going to make sense? I hope she brings us through in the end because it's a long book and it's multiple timelines. So I was reading it just for the reading experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it came down to edit, that's when I put on I have an editorial hat, which is very pretty and has feathers on it. And then I have my businessy hat. And that is a little bit more of a uniform, so to speak. And then I dig in and I get a little bit more, I guess, clinical is the way to go. And that's when I start making notes, tons and tons of pages of notes, questions to myself to see if I can answer them by the end of the book. And we dig in and we dig in and dig in. And as you know, and as you and I had discussed prior to the deal being made, we were very honest with one another of what I thought from that first initial read. And of course, after I dug back in before you and I spoke, just to get some more specifics going, I told you, and I think this is very important for editors and authors to do, which is why, for the most part, editors and authors speak on the phone now before a deal is made, to tell you in all sincerity what I thought needed work and whether or not you were going to be willing to do it. Some editors have a vision that might say, this beautiful novel about generational trauma in a family of women would be great if aliens landed. And then that's when you say, I don't think that's the editor for me. Like every editor has a different vision. And so I was pretty honest with you, I think, when I said, I think it could be a little shorter. I was a little confused about how these connect. I think that we spend a little more time in this timeline and less in this one, and I wanted to invert that a little bit. And so I don't think a lot of my edits when I sent them to you were quite surprising. I want to know on your end, how did you react? I'm sure it was a little alarming when you first start seeing the blood on the tracks, so to speak, the red all over the manuscript.
Well, honestly, it wasn't. And I think that goes to just my background having self-published. But even when I was self-publishing, I hired editors. And so
Right.
I hired a developmental editor, I hired a copy editor to help me make it the best it could be because I knew there were things that I did not see. And then when I did the nonfiction book, Mardi Gras Indians, you know, with the university press, your book is peer reviewed. And like I'm not a
Right.
scholar. So like I am not a scholar, I'm not an academic, I'm not a historian, I'm a journalist, but I was telling this story about this oral tradition that is so rooted in history. And so when I got notes back from that book from the peer review process where it's like this professor PhD of whatever giving me notes that I had to do something with or else they weren't going to publish the book, like
Right.
me talking to an editor about some fiction was nothing. And then also with Seven Daughters, just the way that it all came together. You spoke earlier about like the spirit that, possessed me. As I
Yes.
was writing it, I was literally hearing the characters' voices so much so that when I finished just writing their stories before I had put the entire narrative together, because I wrote it in pieces. I remember when I finished just writing all the stories and I got to the very last character that will remain unnamed, I stopped hearing them and I was like, hold on, where'd you go?
Come back.
No, really, come back. I need help putting it together. Like, I don't know what goes where. And so it was really like leaning into that spirit to put it together. So when it got to Peter and he had me make a couple edits before it got to you, I was like, okay, sure, fine. Because like I don't know what I'm doing, where I'm going. I am in fresh new territory. The story got so big for me that I was like, I knew it needed a team. And so I was
Yeah.
open to edits and open to the vision that you had. And like one of the things that I remember that you saying, the friendship between the mother and her former best friend, Nadia and Toya, you're like,
Yes.
we need to know the backstory here, like what's going on, and like
Yep.
introduce that sooner. And so like it was fine. Like there were some parts I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to address this. I'm going to sit with it for a couple of weeks.
And
But
you always addressed it so perfectly. It was such a pleasure working with you. because you were open to the edits. You killed your darlings, so to speak. You weren't precious because I did come back, and after a few people had read it, they had a few more edits for me. And I thought, oh no. And so I went back and I'm like, guess what? We thought we were done, but we're not quite done. And we had to go in, and there were certain pieces of certain chapters that we had to snip onto the cutting room floor. And my heart broke with some of those cuts because even though at the end of the day they weren't necessarily vital to the story, I was so in love with your words that I didn't really want anything to go. There weren't parts that were out of left field. Sometimes with edits, you're like, this doesn't need to be here whatsoever, like let's let it go. And it's okay to sacrifice it. But with you, I didn't want anything to go. So that's what made it hard. And so there were certain big portions that we cut. The train station, unfortunately, had to go, which, we can talk to your listeners about it another time if you want. But it was okay to lift it, and it didn't sacrifice the story. But what we lifted was very dear to my heart. And so it was hard. It was a harder process because I was so emotionally involved with all of the women in your book that for any even little nuggets that didn't matter if they were lifted, I didn't want them to go. And I kept saying to you, now we're going to cut this, but save it somewhere, because I want it to happen somewhere. I don't know if it's going to be a prequel or a sequel, or if it's just like a side piece, or maybe it's just something that I can revisit on my own. But everything that we cut, a lot of the time I'm like, toss it, throw it in the trash. But with you, I'm like, I kept saying to you, save this. Please just save this, even if we don't use it, save it somewhere, because the writing was just so extraordinary. I felt precious about it.
So I have a document called Cuts I Like in my files, along with every version of this book. And what got to me in the editorial process, there were certain lines that I loved. So there were scenes that I was okay cutting, but this line is coming back somewhere.
Yes.
One of my favorite lines is, I'm comparing Gladys to a Venus flytrap. And the red, and then the line is something like, she'll swallow your simple ass whole. I was like, wait, that line is gone. Where'd it go? Bring it back. Bring it back. And so that was how I was at the very end. It was like, what are my favorite lines in there? And then I think the very last edit, I think I sent that back to you in 4 hours. I was like, I'm going out tomorrow. I don't want this on my mind. Back to you. Like, right. Made these cuts. And I texted you. I was like, hey, I said I was going to do it this weekend. I did it in 4 hours. It's yours now. I'm done.
There comes a point in every revision process, every single one, where every author, every single one says, I never want to look at this again. And the funny thing is, because it's like, we're on our 6th edit, but you had been writing it, or they had been writing it for a year anyway, so there comes a point with every single author, without fail, where they're like, I never want to look at this again. And lo and behold, we're not publishing the book usually for another 18 months. So by the time the book, right? So by the time the book comes out, they're like, oh, this thing, they're already like halfway through another book, or, something. And we have to say, the world doesn't even know about it yet, so let's get on the train and let's, so there does come a point in time where you get to that wall. But then for me, a year and a half later, a year later, however much time has gone by, over the past couple of weeks, I've been now introducing you in any way that I can to booksellers on Zoom, in person. And I always go back and reread the book, not from start to finish. I'll get it and skim and just re-immerse myself in the world. And I'll say, oh my God, this book is so good. It's because I haven't really jumped back in since we were in the trenches together, in a very intense and concentrated way, line by line, word by word, joining up timelines, joining up loose ends, making sure that what got cut didn't have a ripple effect down the road, because your book is very intense in that way. And you get reminded again, right as publication is coming down the road, oh my God, this book is so good. But you kind of lose the forest for the trees when you're in the intense process for a while.
So as we are about to put this book in the world, do you have any questions for me?
We touched on the fact that a spirit kind of came to you. I know that we've also discussed the fact that this is based loosely on a real place, and real things that happened. I wanted to ask you how you, in your brain, and then your fingers synthesize something that came before that was real with, I am assuming, some personal story. Like how do you synthesize something that is inspired by real events and then the fictional stories that are coming to you in your head? How do you blend them and get them down on the page in a way that is respectful of both things?
It usually starts with an unanswered question from the real life event.
Yes,
And so,
I love that.
like with Seven Daughters, it was supposed to be such a simple story. It was just supposed to be Tati not knowing her dad. And when we get to the end, she finds him. It was
Great.
supposed to be that simple. And when I started writing, I got bored with her. Like I liked her, but I was like, this is not sustainable. Like this teenage angst, I'm over you. So then I was like, let me write her mom, the mom and the dad, and get their relationship down and see what happens. And then pick her back up in like 5 years and see what her life is looking like now, what she knows and how she finds out. And so like those two sections were always there. And then in that final section, which is still one of the final sections in the book, when that big Thanksgiving scene, it was
The
Gladys.
best, just the best scene in the world.
Like where Tati's finally getting answers, and the grandmother Gladys says the line, what do you think happens to women in the South, like light-skinned women in the South, something like that. And I remember like writing that line, it was just in there, and then I finished like the first draft with just Tati and Nadia and Gladys in the mix, but not her full story. And it was lingering with me, and I'd never had that happen where like a book was still lingering, like it was undone. Like usually like when I hit a period, it's like, okay, I know what I want to do, but this is very clear. But this was very much like, nah, this something happening. So I started asking myself the question, well, what happened to Gladys? And then I could see this vision of the woman that is the cover of the book walking down this dirt road in this white dress and seeing what was behind her and where she was going. And like I kind of knew what happened to her. And then I say it all the time, listening to my friend Desha Phil, y'all talk about the best first line that she'd ever written for her book, which was in her short story collection, Peach Cobbler, that best first line. And then asking myself that question, and the first line of the book like just dropping into my spirit, and I was like, oh, I know I have to go all the way back to like at least 1860. And at that time in life I was freelancing, so I was writing about Kingsley Plantation here in Jacksonville where I live, which has ties to American Beach, which was a beach that was owned by a man named Abraham Lincoln Lewis, who was the first African American millionaire in the state of Florida. He and his business associates who ran the Afro-American Life Insurance Company bought 200 acres of land in like 1930 something and created this beach for Black beachgoers to go and to be able to enjoy the sun and the surf. And so like that was in my mind. And then it was also a few years after the Clotilda ship had been found in Mobile in Alabama in the river, and they'd found the ship and the books were coming out, and I was listening to the Into the Depths podcast with Tara Roberts, who I've met. I was her TEDx coach when she came to Jacksonville, and then I've interviewed her on this podcast. Like all of this was in my mind. And so when I realized I was going to go back to 1860, it was immediately that thought of the Clotilda, but then incorporating some of the story of Kingsley Plantation, because Anna Kingsley, who ran it, she was kidnapped from Senegal at the age of 13 in like 1790 something, and raped by Zephaniah Kingsley, but was recognized as his wife, had several children for him. He emancipated her, and then he ran the plantation. And so all of that is in my mind when I got that first line of the novel. But I was like, I don't want to adhere to the true story of Kingsley Plantation or the true story of the Clotilda or of Africa Town. I need to do what I want to do in this book, in which I wasn't completely clear what it was going to be. I just knew I was going to go to 1860. And so then like the church girl in me was like, okay, 7 is the number of completion. So it has to be 7 women for 7 generations. And then I just kind of kept asking myself the question, what are their names? And what are their issues? And what are the problems? And they came relatively quickly. And then as I started writing them, they just took over.
Oh, and it's so apparent in the read. With each one, as I'm introduced to them, as I was reading it in manuscript form, she's my favorite. No, now, nope, now she's my favorite. Oh no, this poor one is, and then I'm like, oh, this one's a tough one, like there's certain ones that you're like, ooh. I don't know. She's not exactly as, nice as the others. Of course, you know who my favorite is.
Yes.
But the thing about writing a book with seven main characters, like that's the thing. That is one of the many gorgeous things, but incredibly hard things for you to do, I'm assuming, when writing this book. Having one main character usually and one protagonist, one antagonist, other people that sort of orbit them and
Mm-hmm.
contribute to the plot and either move it forward or throw up roadblocks, to our protagonist or antagonist. That's typically the structure of a novel. You're handing me a book with seven main characters. And they're all coming in and out of chapters. We're not starting at A and ending at Z. We're going all over the place in time. And I was so in awe of that, and I guess it's hearing you tell it now, how they all came to you and how they were all kind of knocking around your brain saying, it's my turn, I want to talk, I'm picturing like what used to be like a party line, a million people on the phone at once and everyone wants to talk. So I can't imagine how you could tell everyone sit down except you, Gladys. It's your turn. Now you can sit down. Emma, stand up, like, so I can't imagine the writing process with seven main characters. And yet it comes across our love and respect and admiration and deep sympathy for each of them comes in equal measure, as
Yeah.
each of their own stories unfolds.
I would say writing them, I call myself like a lazy try hard. Like I want to try really hard, but I'm also can be very lazy about it. And so like when I realized I was going to have to write all of these extra characters, I was like, I don't want to write a whole nother book just with them to then figure out how to put it together with the first part. And so I was like, okay, what are the secrets to the daughters are the turning points for the mother. So that's the way that I thought about it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna give you a smidge before the actual event and then the aftermath. And so with that in mind, it kind of helps synthesize and be really specific about what I was doing with all of the additional characters, with the extra daughters, starting with Gladys. And so like I wrote her story first, and then I really did write them backwards. So I wrote Gladys completely, start to finish. And then I wrote her mother, Ruby, and then I wrote
Yeah.
her mother, Juby, and then I wrote Emma, and then I wrote the last one. And by the time I got to the last one, I was so clear about what that was going to be. I was just like, get it done. And
Oh,
finished
it's just,
it.
I have to say the structure of this book is so compelling because the mystery, there are so many different thematic threads running through the book, mothers and daughters and secrets and, forgiveness, which I think is a huge piece and ever more important right now. But it's a generational family saga about mothers and daughters, but also it's strangely a mystery because you hold back what essentially everyone as a reader wants to know, but what Tati, our youngest main character, really needs to know.
Mm,
And it's what none of the seven generations want to talk about because of how terrible it was.
mm-hmm,
And so you have this structure of plot where we're turning the pages as quickly as we can while still savoring the beauty of the language and the story. We're turning the pages as fast as we can to get to a point, to get to a story, to get to a revelation that we know is not going to be good.
yeah.
So that is compelling in and of itself. We are on a train heading toward a destination that we know is not going to be beautiful when we get there, but that we all need to know it.
Mm-hmm,
And that once you know it, the healing begins. At least that was my read. I think everyone's going to read it in a different way. But I'm like, what happened to this poor woman at the head of the line that has caused six generations now of emotional roller coasters, but also deep pain and yet connectivity.
mm-hmm,
Each of these women is hiding something from the next generation, but it's out of love. They're hiding this essential piece of their history out of love. And yet, not knowing that if they don't hide it, if they reveal it, then you can start to heal.
mm-hmm.
And inevitably, I don't want to give anything away. Inevitably, it comes to pass. But the beauty of it, what is a mother's duty to their daughter? Our compulsion as a mother of a daughter, and I know you're a mother of a daughter too, is to sort of shield them from what you had to go through, and you think you're doing your best, but maybe shielding isn't the way to go, and I think you spoke about it so beautifully. What's our duty as mothers?
And then, like, even when you're doing your best, it still may not be enough for the daughter. And so then they have to go on their own journey of reckoning. But if you don't talk about what you've been through, nobody can heal. So that was one of the themes that definitely came through. And I'm so glad we got there together.
I'm so glad we got there too. I know. I mean, do you want to talk about the contest?
Yeah. Because that's a full circle moment. I said it in the episode where I'm just detailing the story. But yeah, to come to find out that you were the person over the contest. And you told me on our call when we spoke after I actually said yes, that I wanted to work with you as my editor, that you had gone back and looked at the records and that you had said yes to me 2 years ago, but the other editors on the contest had said no, and it was a pass.
Yes.
Which was like the best pass protection ever.
It was the universe telling you can have more time. I think that to me, which to find that out after the fact, to find that out after we had agreed and you had honored me with the pleasure of working with you, that contest, we received hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of submissions. And so there was a committee of us that would read stacks at a time. And it had to have 2 out of 3 people say yes to it, And when we went back and looked, I had been the one to say yes to your piece. So for that to happen unknowingly, and for you to be writing it on the day your daughter's born, the same day my daughter was born, I just feel like there was something in the air.
Yeah.
It was some sort of divine intervention that came through in the end. I don't know. There's something very beautiful about that for me.
But like, even when I wrote the email to Peter, like, it was very much like that. I hadn't made a concrete decision as I'm trying to compose this email about who I want to work with. And I don't know if he still has it, but like, it's very much, I like this about this one, and I like this about Alison, I like this, and I like this. And then at the very last line, I was like, it's Alison. And I just hit submit and just hit send. He was like, yeah, I didn't. And like, he called me, he was like, I didn't know where you were going with that until you got to the I was like,
you're like, I don't know either.
Me either, but it was very much a spirit thing. It was just like just a deep knowing it's Alison. And so then for all of these semblances and connections to come through, it's been so very special and beyond my wildest dreams to be here with you and to have you as my editor and Scout as my publisher. Like, I am overjoyed.
It has been, as I said, my deepest honor. And I just can't wait. I can't wait till the book is out there and I can start shoving it into people's hands just because it is so, I am publishing this book with you with so much pride and admiration. And just sort of knowing, I know you've self-published and I know you've won awards. This isn't your debut, so to speak. But I hope, it is my greatest hope and intention to take what you have done so far and amplify it and make your stage bigger, and find a broader audience, and to be working with my colleagues in the UK to do the same thing now abroad and to find a much bigger readership for Nikesha Elise Williams, because you absolutely deserve it. And I cannot wait to see what you write next. I have to focus on this one right now. But don't misunderstand me. I have greedy hands and I cannot wait, to see what you're doing next. I am incredibly patient. There's zero pressure. But if this for me is I'm only hoping this is the beginning of a long work relationship with you. It is my great honor.
Me too. I'm like halfway through draft 2, but it is what it is. It's just there.
I haven't read one word, listeners.
You sure haven't. Big thank you to Alison Callahan for being here today on Black and Published. You can follow Alison on the socials at Ali Cali Yoga on Instagram and Threads. Now, this is the time that I tell you to pre-order a copy of The 7 Daughters of Dupree from anywhere you get your books. But if you can't pre-order because Christmas broke the bank and that tax refund check hasn't hit yet, you can still request the novel at your local library. It still counts. And in this age of book bans, Every request and vote of confidence helps the bottom line. You can also see me on tour. It kicks off this Saturday, January 24th, 2026, in Jacksonville, Florida, where I live. You can find information about the tour, dates, locations, and time on my website, www.newrights.com. And Rights is WRITES. Or on my Instagram page or Threads, both are at Nikesha_Elise. That's our show for the week. I'll holler at y'all next week when I turn the hosting reins over to Bookstagram and Book Talk influencers Jamise Harper of Diverse Spines and Edric Scarver of Edric Reddit to ask me all the reader questions about the 7 Daughters of Dupree.
Black families, we have so many secrets and silences. What's passed down, what's not passed down, what's kept hidden. And so it feels very central to the novel.
One of the things that I took away from the book was it felt like we could tell our history through our hair.
That's next week on Black and Published. I'll talk to you then. Peace.
What's going on, family? This is Derek Young
and Ramonda Young,
owners of both Mahogany Books and the Mahogany Books Podcast Network.
We really want to thank each and every one of you for listening to this episode. And if you enjoyed what you just heard, drop us a review and rate us on whatever platform you download podcasts on.
We truly appreciate each and every one of you for supporting us and making us your go-to for Black books. And we look forward to connecting with you all sometime in the future.
Thank you again, fam. And always remember, Black books matter.